A very warm welcome to this webinar. My name is Willis Okumu. I am a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. At the Institute for Security Studies, we run various human security research programs. Among these include enhancing Africa's response to transnational organized crimes, otherwise known as ENACT. ENACT is a consortium between the Institute for Security Studies, Interpol, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crimes. For today's webinar, we aim to launch a research report titled Growing Gone, Safeguarding South Africa's Illegally Traded Succulents, authored by my colleague, Dr. Carina Bruwer. In the webinar, we will have 4 speakers to illuminate the debate on illegal succulents trade in South Africa. But before then, I would like to invite Mrs. Elisabet Dahlberg Frisk of the European Union to offer opening remarks. Welcome, Madam.
Thank you very much. And a very good morning to you all. I'm very pleased to be here today on behalf of the European Union delegation to South Africa. And I would call myself a big admirer of the unique biodiversity of South Africa, its stark and striking landscape and unique fynbos vegetation. But I have to admit that upon receiving this invitation, I had to take a closer look at what a succulent really is. And Googling the images, I came to realize that these thickened, fleshy, engorged plants with their unique ability to retain water are basically the only plants that ever survive in my garden and home here in South Africa. So I would say that makes them truly resilient and unique. And these beautiful succulents have caught the eye of enthusiasts and collectors all over the world. And scientists are also waking up to the medicinal benefits of succulents. There's the example of the hoodia, a cactus-like plant that historically the San communities of Southern Africa are believed to have used to suppress their appetite. And with today's issues around obesity, you can imagine how attractive the hoodia has become in pursuit of weight loss. And the list of such plants just goes on and on. As you may be aware, ENACT, or Enhancing Africa's Ability to Counter Transnational Crime, is an initiative that is funded by the European Union since 2017. But when we're looking at Africa and transnational crime, we often discuss the issue of wildlife crime, indeed an area also covered by ENACT. But notably, however, many illegally traded plants are even more rare than some of the endangered animals that we often highlight, with some species facing imminent extinction. And the succulent Karoo biodiversity with plants found nowhere else in the world is under clear threat. The illegal harvesting of wild succulent plants from this region has pushed many rare and endemic plant species to the brink of extinction. And the research launched today provides an important evidence base, which will help shed light on this fast emerging illegal succulent trade and the importance of a multi-stakeholder effort to counter it. So from the European Union side, we would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the ENACT team and the Institute for Security Studies, implementing ENACT in partnership with Interpol and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Your leadership and the strong partnerships built are really invaluable, and we thank you to opening our eyes to this very important field. I hope we will all leave the seminar today with an even greater appreciation for the biodiversity in this country, and that we both here and abroad start to interrogate where our plants purchases are sourced from and spread the word about the risks facing South Africa's unique succulent flora. So with this, I wish you good deliberations, and I trust that the recommendations coming out of the research and the discussions today will benefit not only South African stakeholders, but also offer lessons for the protection of flora across the continent and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Elisabeth. We really appreciate the support of the European Union in supporting our program, ENACT, which is enhancing Africa's response to transnational organized crime. We move on to the next phase of this webinar for today. We are going to have, as I said, 4 speakers. But before we invite Dr. Carina Bruwer, the author of this report, I'd like just to tell the audience that later on we'll have a question and answer session. And to do that, you will be invited to type in your questions in the chat box. Or later, we can also have people raising their hands, and then we'll pick it up from there. But at this moment, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Carina Bruwer, who is the author of Growing Gone, Safeguarding South Africa's Illegally Traded Succulents, to present her report. Welcome, Dr. Carina.
Thank you, Willis. I'm just going to share my screen. So please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, I can see it, Dr. Carina.
Okay, let me just quickly sort out these. All right, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you also to Elisabet for your opening remarks. Of course, we appreciate the EU funding our project, without which we won't be able to do the research that we do. So as Willis has mentioned, I'm the author of the report titled Growing Gone. And so my presentation is going to give you just a brief overview of the content of the report, and this will hopefully then set the scene for the other 3 speakers who will give you some insights on their work that they're doing on the ground and literally sometimes in the field. Sorry, I'm just navigating my different screens here. Can you see the next slide? Right. So if we look at the focus of the report, or the aim of the report, it had 3 primary aims. The first is to present an overview of the illegal market supplying wild harvested South African succulents. And the second is to explore the practical implementation of the National Response Strategy and Action Plan that was developed to address the illegal trade. And the third is to present views from stakeholders on how to optimize the implementation of this strategy. So I think here it's important to mention that most of the data in the report was gathered through interviews with 28 stakeholders, all of whom are working to respond to the illegal succulent market in some way. And so when we look at these 3 research aims, these were informed by speaking to a group of different stakeholders. So you can see that I spoke to government and non-governmental organizations. We spoke to police, both provincial police. We spoke to the national environmental departments, provincial. So 28 different stakeholders gave their inputs, and that eventually gave us the report that we are going to discuss today. So in terms of the research focus, Elisabet has done a very good job to explain this, but I was very surprised to find out that one of my colleagues asked me, what is a succulent? And so not everyone actually knows. So as Elisabet has correctly mentioned, these are typically plants that store water in their roots, their leaves, or their stems. This causes them to appear swollen. So some of the most popular succulents or well-known succulents are cacti and aloes, but there really are thousands of different species, and all of these are adapted to survive in arid conditions. Of course, the report focuses on succulents, but it also focuses on specific area within South Africa. So the succulents that we're talking about today are all found in the succulent Karoo region. So this is a region that stretches across South Africa, including from the Eastern Cape Province to the Western Cape Province and the Northern Cape Province, all the way into southern Namibia. So some of the areas within this region that you might be familiar with include Namakwaland and the Richtersveld. And even more specifically, the report will focus on the plants that are found in the Western Cape and the Northern Cape, because this is where the most of the species are being harvested. So today, I think this counts for all speakers. When we refer to succulents, you can assume that we are talking about succulent Karoo species specifically. So why is there a market for succulents? Is there a specific driver? So if you look at the succulent Karoo, it is really a truly unique biome in South Africa. It is a global biodiversity hotspot. We have 40% of its succulents that are endemic, which means that they occur nowhere else on Earth. So we really do house something that is extremely unique here in South Africa. Now, of course, because these succulents are only found in South Africa, many of them are extremely rare, and they also have unique features, and this makes them very popular with ornamental plant consumers. So just like orchids or cycads, succulents are in demand for their appearance. So they might have beautiful flowers or interesting shapes, and this, of course, makes them a little bit different to other succulents that might be in demand for their medicinal purposes. So there is a global legal market for ornamental South African succulents. This market is primarily supplied by artificially propagated plants that are grown by nurseries. Some of these nurseries are based in South Africa, but most of them are in fact based abroad. And then, of course, while we are here today, there's also a parallel illegal market. And this is supplied by wild harvested plants that are sourced directly from South Africa. So what is the key distinction between the legal and the illegal markets other than the source of the plants? So if you consider how trade is regulated, trade in South Africa's plants is regulated internationally, nationally, and provincially. And these legal frameworks require permits to trade in certain species. We typically refer to them as protected species. So if you want to trade in a species, so for example, harvest it, transport it, buy or sell it, you would typically need a permit to do so. So if we look at the international legal framework, this is regulated by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Nationally, this is the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act. And provincially, this is in terms of the 9 different provinces who each have their own environmental legislation. And we'll get to the complexities on that a little bit later. So the key difference is, whereas the legal market mostly adheres to these regulations or the legal frameworks, the illegal market does not, and in fact tries its best to circumvent it. So what does this market actually look like? So as I've mentioned, most of this market is based abroad. So the majority of demand is situated abroad. This includes in Asia, especially at the moment, but also in the United States, for example, and across Europe and a few other countries across the globe. This is interestingly also where most of the nurseries that supply the market are located. And if we look at where these plants are harvested, so I've mentioned they occur in the succulent Karoo, but they really come from across the succulent Karoo region. And this is a massively large area. And this is also one of the key challenges of the response, is protecting these plants in this very vast area that they occur in. So these plants are harvested primarily on private land. So this would, for example, be farms or land owned by mining companies, but they're also harvested on communal land and in protected areas. And what's further is a challenge for the responders to the illegal market is that the species that are being harvested are constantly evolving, and there are hundreds being targeted, so hundreds different species. I think it's important to mention, and perhaps Dominique will also discuss this a bit, is that illegal harvesting is not new. It's not a recent thing, and it's been going on for decades. But the scale of illegal harvesting has definitely increased in the last few years, typically around 2019. So I believe that the verdict is still out, considering what exactly is driving demand for wild plants, because there really is just too little data on this so that I can say with certainty that I believe we know exactly what is driving it. But some of the reasons that could be driving demand is that demand for certain species might surpass what was legally available from nurseries. It could be that collectors might want specific specimens that can't be supplied by nurseries. So, for example, a very large plant that by default would be very old. It's very rare that a nursery will have a plant that's much older than the nursery itself. And buyers might also prefer the characteristics of a wild plant. But what we do know with certainty is that globalization and the internet have definitely fueled the market tremendously. And this is because anyone can now show off their plants and buy a plant from anywhere across the world. There's also consensus that it is primarily plant collectors and commercial traders that is driving the illegal market, much more so than the average consumer who is buying a succulent only now and again. So, for example, like you and I, when we go to Willis and we buy a succulent, that's probably not the driver of the illegal market abroad. And we also see that plants are probably being harvested to fulfill specific orders. So again, this tells us that someone abroad has ordered a specific consignment, specific species. It's not just incidental. So if we look at how the market operates, so it mimics really a lot of other illegal wildlife markets, especially ones where demand is concentrated abroad and where harvesting is done primarily by local people, with a mixture of local and foreign people that orchestrate the logistics in between supply and demand. So although foreign harvesters or foreign plant collectors also, or nursery owners, would initially harvest plants themselves, most harvesters, at the moment at least, are locals or perhaps also foreigners based in South Africa, often from around the succulent Karoo region. And unfortunately, due to the socioeconomic conditions within the succulent Karoo, it's not that difficult to find willing harvesters. The arid zone has limited employment opportunities. And so for some individuals, they might consider illegal harvesting as a legitimate source of income, perhaps especially if they don't understand what the impact of that harvesting is. But they might also feel that they are entitled to natural resources that they have grown up amongst because they have been previously dispossessed of land. So that being said, all harvesters aren't homogeneous. We know of foreign and local nursery owners who have harvested plants, and we also know of botanists who have harvested plants, also from abroad. We have seen that while harvesting and trade started out opportunistically, the illegal market is in fact now run by international networks who have also been implicated in other commodities, such as rhino horn, abalone, and drugs. And so we see that there really now is an organized operation to orchestrate the harvesting of plants in South Africa and then to move them abroad to buyers. So as with all forms of organized crime, during the interviews, there were multiple allegations of corruption that's facilitating the market. So this is not unique to succulents. This is with all organized crimes. And also, as with all other forms of organized crime, these networks exploit legitimate supply chains. So plants are moved from the succulent Karoo to urban centers, and then they are moved abroad just like legitimate goods are. So this could be via air, such as by using courier companies, or even through maritime shipment. And we've seen how plants often would pass through multiple transit countries en route to their destination. So if we look at the impact of the illegal market, and this is of course important because this is what the response also aims to address. Of course, the impact goes much further than simply the impact on individual species. It has broader environmental impacts. It also impacts on surrounding communities and on those who respond to the illegal market, as well as legitimate nursery owners. So I won't go through all the impacts for the sake of time, but I'm going to highlight just a few. So if we look at the environmental impact, specifically on a species level, we've seen that entire populations, including sometimes plants that are centuries old, have been taken from the wild. Some species of succulents are now extinct in the wild, and many are now critically endangered. And because many of these populations are so small and slow growing, any harvesting really can have a devastating impact, and these species might take decades to recover if they are able to recover at all. If we look at the impact on people, at a community level, of course, criminal networks are known to exploit local people, who are the ones who primarily risk prosecution for illegal harvesting, and they're also the ones who make the smallest amount of income for plants that are sold for much, much more abroad on the illegal market. We also know that communities may be exposed to other illegal activities, and I think the best example linked to a wildlife market is the interlinked abalone and drug markets as an example. And there, of course, are also impacts on those who are responding to the illegal market. And this is something that came across very strongly in my interviews, where many of the responders said that they are completely overwhelmed due to the scale of the illegal harvesting, the number of plants that they're dealing with, and the limited resources that they have available to do their work. So you can imagine going from your normal day job, which might be something completely different, then having suddenly to process thousands of different seized plants, or millions, and knowing that despite all of your efforts, you have limited capacity and that many of these plants might still end up dying. Responders also noted that due to allegations of corruption, colleagues have become suspicious of one another, and landowners have also become suspicious of responders, as no one knows who to trust anymore. If we look at the economic impact, I think one of the key impacts is the fact that the illegal market is causing legitimate nurseries to lose business. And this is probably due to the fact that the market is now becoming saturated with illegally harvested plants. There's, of course, also an impact on tourism. So this is something that I didn't know before my research, but just as a lot of people come to South Africa to view our wild plants, our wildflowers in Namaqualand, there's also succulent tours. And so if these succulents disappear, so will their contribution to tourism, and of course, the jobs that that industry is able to generate. But luckily, that is not all doom and gloom. There is a national response strategy to address this. And sorry, I see I forgot to skip to the impact slide. There's the impact slide. So this next section of the presentation will focus on the response strategy. So in response to the rapid escalation of the illegal market, a group of stakeholders, including government departments and NGOs, came together to develop what I'm going to refer to today just as the succulent strategy, but its title is the National Response Strategy and Action Plan to Address the Illegal Trade in South African Succulent Flora. So this strategy and the development was coordinated specifically by the South African National Biodiversity Institute, the National Department of Forest, Fisheries and the Environment, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature in South Africa. So I really think there's a lot to be commended about this strategy. The speed at which it was developed and its holistic focus are both probably unprecedented. And I think it really reflects an understanding that law enforcement is only one of many components to address an illegal market. I think it's important to also note now that South Africa also has a national integrated strategy to combat wildlife trafficking. And so the succulent strategy complements this national strategy, but it also goes beyond the national strategy because it has a focus much more broadly than simply security and law enforcement. So you'll see that the strategy has 7 different objectives, and I will share the link to the strategy after my presentation. And each of these objectives aim to address a different driver or impact of the illegal market. Each objective has also been assigned to specific stakeholders to implement so that everyone knows who's responsible for doing what. But I think before we start going into the specific objectives, one key thing to highlight is the fact that much of the strategy, if not all of the strategy's success, really is, you can attribute it to the public and private partnerships in implementing the strategy. And I think this is a key takeaway for any response to a transnational organized crime, where it really is a whole of society effort. It's not just the state that is responsible for countering it, it's civil society, it's NGOs, it's everyone. And you'll see also when you read through the report and the strategy, this really has been an effort through multiple state and non-state actors. So if we look at the different objectives, I'll go through each of them individually. So I'm only going to highlight a few of the key points on each strategy because the other speakers will also speak to some of the objectives that they work on implementing. So the first objective aims to ensure the long-term survival of wild succulent populations. Now, of course, the primary goal is to ensure that plants aren't harvested in the first place. We want to keep them in the veld where they occur naturally. So this objective includes gathering baseline data on populations and testing different ways, including through technology, to monitor populations and exploring whether it will be more beneficial to increase the size of protected area, so to cover more species, or perhaps to rather work with landowners and communities through stewardship agreements to ensure that communities aren't excluded by conservation efforts, which are often known to alienate community members. So I think what's very important about this objective is that it has different approaches to protect plants depending on whether they occur on private land or communal land or in protected areas. So different strategies are followed to protect plants that occur in these different areas because, of course, the settings are very different. The people that you'll be dealing with are very different. Of course, the main challenge to achieving this objective is, as I've mentioned a bit earlier, these plants occur over a massive area. A lot of it is uninhabited, and there's limited technology and people, including law enforcement, to monitor these plants and to respond to incidents. So ideally, what this objective could achieve is to get stakeholders to figure out a way to leverage technology and public-private cooperation to monitor and protect plants to avoid them being harvested in the first place. The second objective aims to establish off-site succulent collections and manage seized plants, and Carina Bakker-de-Tooy will tell you much more about this objective. But it basically aims to ensure that there are representative collections of at-risk species, so that if they do perhaps disappear from the wild, they do have representative collections off-site somewhere. And then, of course, to manage the thousands or now over 1 million seized plants to ensure that as many as possible of them have a chance at survival. So I'm going to focus just on the management of seized plants for today. So some of the challenges to managing this massive amount of plants includes the scale of harvesting, so thousands of plants coming in weekly to responders, a shortage of species experts to identify plants, there's a shortage of nursery supplies, and there's also just a limited amount of space available to house these plants. The responsibility to care for the plants also isn't shared equally between the Western and the Northern Cape provinces, and this is mostly due to capacity constraints. And so some of the positive developments under this objective include, so previously it was a challenge for responders to manage plants or to preserve them while they have to form part of evidence during prosecutions, and working the South African National Biodiversity Institute, working with the National Prosecuting Authority, has now found a way around this. So that's one of the positive developments. We've also seen how courts have ordered fines from prosecutions or amounts to be paid to provincial nature conservation agencies or to SANBI to resource their efforts to care for these plants. But despite these positive efforts, that simply is not enough, and much more funds are needed. And as I've mentioned, Carina Bakker-de-Tooy will tell you about their efforts to do this. The third objective is to capacitate the compliance and enforcement sector to enable more effective action against illegal harvesting and trade. So, of course, if we look at responses to different forms of organized crime, this is one of the more typical responses, the law enforcement response. So this objective aims to improve compliance and criminal justice capacities. And I think it should be mentioned here that there have been a lot of successful law enforcement and criminal justice efforts. So there have been multiple successful seizures, including by the South African Police Service's Stock Theft and Endangered Species Units, by Environmental Management Inspectorates, by Customs. And these seizures have taken place in multiple locations. So they've taken place while plants have been transported, while they've been harvested in the field, at houses of middlemen, and at ports of entry and exit. Something that also came across quite strongly during my interviews is that although most plants are harvested in the Northern Cape, the majority of seizures have taken place in the Western Cape, and this has again been attributed to limited resources. And as Advocate Hiraman will tell you a bit later, there have also been many successful prosecutions, although for a while there was a halt in prosecutions in the Northern Cape, and she will tell you a little bit more about that. But despite these successes, so the successful seizures and the successful prosecutions, there still is a shortage of capacity and awareness among responders. So when I spoke to law enforcement entities, they acknowledged that they are aware that they are primarily arresting the low-level network members and the middlemen based in South Africa, instead of focusing on the senior or international network members. And the interviews identified some of the key challenges to compliance and law enforcement in general, which I will just quickly mention. So everyone noted the shortage of staff, resources, and technology, the impact that corruption is having on law enforcement efforts and on compliance, the lack of cooperation between national and provincial government departments and interprovincially, the fact that there's different provincial and national legislation, which means that it's very difficult to do law enforcement across borders. And there's also limited expertise to identify species, and there's a limited understanding of the global succulent trade dynamics. And this is something that I know academic researchers, but Traffic is also working on researching. The fourth objective aims to streamline regulatory frameworks to support compliance and enforcement and to enhance sustainable use and management of succulents. So this objective aims to ensure that legal frameworks are effective at addressing illegal trade, but also that they create an enabling environment for legal trade. Now, the challenge that I've alluded to a bit earlier that South Africa has is that we have concurrent national and provincial legislation. And these forms of legislation don't protect the same species across the board. So it might be illegal to harvest a plant in one province or to transport a plant in one province, but it's not illegal anywhere else in South Africa. And that means by default that it also is unlikely to be an illegal activity abroad. So again, some of the positive developments under this objective: more species have now been listed on CITES, and more have been proposed for listing on our national legislation as threatened or protected species. So the aim of this objective is really to align legislation protecting succulents provincially, nationally, and internationally. And I think what is encouraging is this objective also acknowledges that the current regulatory framework disincentivizes legal trade, and this is something that nurseries have been very vocal about and that hopefully there'll be more discussions on. Then the fifth objective looks at reducing pressure on wild succulents by engaging local communities and facilitating the diversification of livelihoods. So I'm just going to quickly make a few comments on engaging communities. So this objective acknowledges that social economic conditions are a driver of the illegal market, and the stakeholders therefore aim to engage with the people in areas where harvesting is concentrated, to understand how they feel about harvesting, do they support it, are they against it, and to develop solutions with them instead of for them. And I think this was summarized very well by one of the interviews, where someone said that to help the plants, you have to help the people. So this objective also aims to understand the potential negative impact of conservation, such as excluding communities. I've mentioned this a little bit earlier as well. And responders also warned against using a one-size-fits-all solution. And this is based on the fact that we often say we talk about the community, but we don't really know what the community looks like. And this might mean different things in different areas. And then the second last objective, number 6, aims to effectively communicate the impact of the illegal market. This is really just to ensure that messaging around the illegal market contributes to conservation and sustainable use instead of causing further harm. So, for example, it shouldn't create the impression that plants are in fact worth more than they really are. And a lot of the media, I think, is guilty of really almost criminalizing communities and calling everyone poachers, when really this is an entire illegal market that's global, and we can't just focus on, the local harvesters that are illegally harvesting. So that is why messaging is important. And then the final objective aims to explore the options to develop the formal succulent economy as a way to contribute to socio-economic development and conservation. So this really is to consider the potential of increasing legal trade to counter the illegal trade. So we've recently co-hosted a workshop with SANBI to discuss different options for the formal economy, and I can tell you that this is probably one of the most complex objectives to figure out and to implement. But so this objective is based on the idea that by allowing people to benefit from natural resources, they will be incentivized to protect them instead of losing them to illegal trade, where their value is then rather realized abroad. So this objective considers different potential nursery models. And again, WWF has done a report on this. This was discussed at the workshop that we co-hosted with SANBI. But I think what's important to remember is that key to all of these models is that the benefits have to flow back to the communities living around targeted species. And another key challenge is the fact that South Africa doesn't have a monopoly on our own species. The nurseries abroad do. So the only realistic way to grow the formal economy is if we are to become competitive with nurseries abroad, who are, of course, also located closer to the source of demand. Nursery owners also warned against flooding the market, saying that this might cause the plants to lose their value and therefore cause nurseries to, in fact, lose money. And they noted the difficulties of starting new nurseries and running costs and the time it takes to get plants ready for retail. So all of the challenges that existing nurseries experience will also be experienced by these new nurseries if they were to be developed. And then finally, sorry, I'm aware that I've gone a little bit over time. So that was a summary of the response strategy, which really is South Africa's best weapon against the illegal trade. And if it is successful, I think it will make an excellent blueprint for other countries also experiencing plant-related crimes. And so in the interviews, I asked stakeholders what was necessary to optimize the response's implementation. And based on that, I've made the following recommendations. I'm not going to go into detail on them for the sake of time. I'm just going to go read through what they are. So the first one is responders noted that they are in urgent need of resources and staff nationally and provincially. and that there is definitely more scope to explore private funding sources to implement the strategy. And this is based on the fact that a lot of stakeholders felt that they aren't receiving the necessary assistance, especially from national governments, to implement the strategy. The second recommendation is to effect long-term interdepartmental cooperation to address the socioeconomic drivers of the trade. So very few departments are actually involved in implementing the strategy despite its holistic focus. The third recommendation is that we really do need more research on the transnational aspects of the illegal succulent market, because we can only target the entire illegal market if we know what is driving it. The fourth recommendation is to increase international cooperation with other countries implicated in the illegal market. So, of course, responders are aware of that, but at the moment, it seems that most responses are still concentrated within South Africa, and there's definitely much more scope to work with, especially law enforcement internationally, to counter the entire illegal market. And now that more species have been listed on CITES, that will hopefully be happening. The fifth recommendation is to investigate and act on alleged corruption. Participants felt that despite ongoing allegations, nothing is being done, and this is really discouraging, and they feel that their work has very little impact because of this. The sixth recommendation is to harmonize national and provincial legislation. And this is, of course, necessary to protect species that are perhaps endemic to only a specific province, to protect them nationally and internationally, and to ensure that resources can be allocated from national government to implement new species listings. And then finally, I think we need to encourage botanical education. If you think about the fact that South Africa is the third most biodiverse country in the world, and yet most South Africans still have no idea that our succulents are in trouble. And I think this means that we have failed to highlight the importance of our plants, but also the plight of our plants that are in trouble. And so in conclusion, yes, the succulent market poses a massive challenge, but we have a really impressive response strategy implemented by exceptionally passionate people from state and non-state entities. But they can only achieve their aims if they are sufficiently resourced and can focus their efforts internationally. So for more information on how to possibly achieve this, please do read the report, please do read the National Response Strategy, and feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A session later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carina, for a very comprehensive report and presentation. I think for me, the take home here is that if you want to help the plants, then you have to help the people. And this speaks to the importance of protection programs, environmental protection programs with the people. A lot of times we see programs that basically want to exclude communities in protection programs. So thank you very much. This report just presented by Carina is actually available on the ENACT website. So if you go to www.enactafrica.org, you will find the succulent report written by Dr. Carina Bruwer. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Ms. Dominique Prince-Lou, who is the project manager for Traffic, Southern Africa. Traffic is an NGO working to ensure that trade in wild species is legal and sustainable. Dominique currently manages a project called Harmonizing Technology to End the Illegal Trade in Succulent Plants. Welcome, Dominique.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, ENACT, for inviting me today. So I'm going to be talking about our project called Harnessing Technology to End the Illegal Trade in Succulent Plants. This is a project that Traffic is working on with the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. It's funded by the UK government under the DEFRA Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund. And today I'm going to be talking about two outputs of our project. We've got 4 outputs, and we've got a variety of actions that we're involved in the succulent strategy that Carina was referring to. But I'm specifically going to be looking at what we're doing in terms of online monitoring. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a background on what do we know about the illegal succulent trade. Carina did mention quite a bit of this. But I'll go through this quite quickly, and then we'll move on to what's happening online. So as mentioned, there's a variety of succulent plants from South Africa that are in demand. And most of this that we're seeing online is for ornamental use. So the word succulent actually refers to a broad group of plants. It's actually almost any plants that has the has the ability to retain water, which is known as succulents. And so it can apply to a lot of species. So when we look at succulents, we look at plants from the genus Aloe, the genus Conophytum, which refers to dwarf succulents that are mostly found in the Northern Cape Province in southern Namibia. And then we have a variety of species from the genus Euphorbia. There's an interesting group of plants called caudiciforms, which are plants that form a caudex, which is a swollen base. And these can include elephant's foot, so something from the genus and species Dioscorea elephantypes, and then other genera like Adenium, Cyphostemma, Euphorbia, and Pachypodium. In the last year or two, we've seen a massive increase of flowering plants, and what's being confiscated are bulbs from the genus Buophony. So the sources of demand, very much you can split people into three groups. So we do have the general public who are passionate about succulents and who are starting to learn more and more about the different species and seeing what's available out there online. We then have specialized collectors, which know exactly which genus and species they're looking for and are probably willing to pay a lot of money to get their hands on these plants. And then we have commercial traders who are essentially bridging the gaps between the source countries and in those who are collecting them overseas. And so the source countries, very much South Africa and Namibia, are on high alert at the moment because a lot of the plants that are wild harvested illegally are coming from these two countries. But unfortunately, they're not the only ones. We're seeing a huge demand for plants coming from places like Madagascar, as well as East Africa. And in the demand countries, there is a domestic trade in Southern African succulents. There are people here who trade in indigenous species, but majority of the demand is actually international. And so we know that there are states within the United States, as well as countries within Europe and Southeast Asia that have a demand for these plants. But very much so, we see a lot of plants moving to places like China, Japan, South Korea, and so on. And so one of the interesting things is that this trade is not new. It's actually been going on for more than 30 years, the trade in succulent plants. But 30 years ago, you would have had to fill out a mail order from a physical catalog and send it to a nursery, perhaps overseas, to get your plants a couple of weeks later. This is no longer happening, and very much everything is happening on online platforms. And so what we're seeing on social media is we're seeing everything from adverts to, I call them admiration posts, because merely they're photographs of the plants and people wanting to share, how they look. So we're seeing these on Instagram, Facebook, WeChat, and WhatsApp. We've got e-commerce websites such as eBay and Etsy and many others that are selling succulent plants. And then we also have auctions taking place on eBay and Facebook. So I'm going to go through a few examples of the types of information that we're seeing online and what we're really trying to do in researching the illegal succulent trade dynamics. So for example, if you were to go to Instagram and you simply had to key in this genus, Conophytum, it'll automatically bring the results associated with a hashtag. As you can see, there are over 279,000 posts, and this increases on a daily basis. This is a huge volume of posts to process that's just not possible to do manually. So for example, if you were to click on any of the posts, you would see hundreds of other hashtags that would need to be processed. And then you'd also possibly be looking for things like price information, links to, if they have websites where they're trading, and perhaps locations of where the plants have come from or where they're going. So along with these posts, you actually have profiles. So these are some examples of adverts, or posts that we found on Instagram. So the two species on the left-hand side are the ones I was referring to earlier. We've got Dioscorea elephantypes in the first pot plant, and then we've got one of the Buophony species with the fan leaves in the second pot plant. And then in the others, you can see there's Euphorbia species, Pelargonium species, we've got Adenium species, and then there's still a flourishing trade in Southern African cycads, as shown by one of the images on the right. Instagram has got another level of complexity when looking at what's happening online. They have stories. So as much as you post what you eat on a daily basis, people post succulent plants for sale and where they've come from. And so these profiles are not only advertising a specific type of plant. It's called Operculicaria pachypus. It's indigenous to Madagascar. They've also advertised the sale of CITES 1 Madagascan tortoises, which you would need CITES permits to be able to trade in these, but international trade is often banned in these species given the threats to them. So when we do find profiles like this, we do alert our colleagues in the various countries, who will then go and alert, let's say, the CITES Management Authority, for example, in Japan and Madagascar. If we had to look at Facebook, as you know, if everyone's got a Facebook profile, there are hundreds of groups. A lot of them are fan sites, but a lot of them are also, rare cactus and succulent sales that can take place. With Facebook, we have the added level of complexity in distinguishing between public and private groups. So accessing public groups is not a problem. Accessing private groups, one has to be really, really careful when entering some of these groups. But again, it's a huge amount of information to process. As you can see, the number of posts a day, it increases on a daily basis for hundreds and thousands of different species of succulents. Just to show you something, some of these plants that are being advertised online. This is Cyphostemma uta. It's indigenous to Namibia. A plant this size on the right is highly unlikely to have been grown in captivity. And so we start looking at things like this and share these with the relevant authorities. If anyone, I'm sure all of you have got a WhatsApp account. If you've ever seen, now there's the opportunity to join WhatsApp sales. So a lot of nurseries will now open a sale platform where you join a group. Maybe there's 300 people, and they post all of these different pictures with prices onto the group, and you say, I'd like this one, I'd like this one, and so on. What you don't know is a lot of these are totally legal to trade in and purchase, but a lot of them are actually protected by the legislation that Carina was referring to, domestic, national and international. So for example, Anacampsaris is a CITES 1 listed genus, and so this could not leave South Africa without permits, but as it is CITES 1 listed, you won't be able to trade in it internationally anyway, unless under specific circumstances. So what does all of this work regarding online monitoring mean? So as I said earlier, traffic and the Royal Kew Botanical Gardens are part of the National Response Strategy, and we're specifically looking at how do we combat online trade and monitor it under Objective 3 of the strategy. So we're going to be looking at using a tool called FloraGuard to monitor online trade, and we hope to develop publications that can inform everyone on exactly how to use this tool and hopefully influence decisions on the trade in plants online. And then we're also planning to proactively engage with online platforms internationally to assist them in monitoring, flagging, and removing suspected wild harvested South African succulents and perpetrator accounts. So to show you a bit of progress of where we are in these two actions, FloraGuard, for example, if anyone would really like to find out more about FloraGuard, I encourage you to go to floraguard.org, and I will gladly have a look at what the resources are that is available online. For example, FloraGuard is actually a type of methodology that can be used. It's a workflow, and it involves an AI web data scraper. And what you're looking at is when you use this is really, can this scrape specific URLs and capture specific information that we'd like to know about? What are the species available online? What are the locations? Do they offer international shipping? How much are they selling them for? And so on. And so a big output of our work is really researching the online space using FloraGuard. So at the moment, it's being refined, and Traffic will then assist Q in analyzing the results. And then later on in the year, we will roll out training on FloraGuard to law enforcement analysts so that they're able to work with the information that they're seeing online. Another part of our action plan is to engage with the Coalition to End Wildlife Trafficking Online. And this is a rather large group of a variety of organizations that are working with e-commerce platforms, social media platforms to do everything from improving their prohibited use policies. So every platform tells you what you can and can't sell. And right now it's being extended to wildlife, and hopefully we can refine it more so that the policies are plants and seed specific. And then with this, we'd like to engage with the monitors or agents on these platforms that are responsible for flagging adverts and actioning and doing some kind of action, being remove the advert or alert the vendor that they're contravening the policy, or encourage the vendor to make sure that all the information is available. Do you need a permit? Do you not need a permit? Do you need a phytosanitary certificate? If you're shipping this internationally, these are the requirements that you have to follow. And lastly, one of the other actions that we're working on is really to educate consumers and the public on how do you purchase plants online in an ethical, legal, and sustainable way. I think as consumers, we do underestimate the power that we have to influence the products that we see in the shop or online. And it's really important now for us to start looking at whether these plants that we're seeing online, were they ethically sourced? Was it done in compliance with legislation and regulations? And is it sustainable to purchase a plant that has been wild harvested? And so this is a blog that we've posted and released, and I'm happy to share the link with you, as it does provide guidance on how to look at plants that are being sold online. There are also a huge number of resources that have been created to help the public and law enforcement distinguish between, is this plant illegally sourced or wild harvested versus not. So this brings me to the end of my presentation on our work on the e-commerce space. Please feel free to reach out to myself or my colleagues. I see there's a few colleagues online from Traffic as well as from Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. We work a lot with supporting law enforcement in any way we can with understanding the online space. Obviously, it's a huge amount of adverts and posts to process. So if you have information that you'd like to share or you'd like to see how you can get involved, please feel free to reach out to us. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Thank you for illuminating us with the role of social media in promoting the legal trade of succulents. This is very informative. So our third speaker will be Dr. Carina Becker-Dutoit. Dr. Carina Becker-Dutoit is the scientific coordinator of the Succulent Plant Policing Response for the South African National Biodiversity Institute, SANBI. And Dr. Dutoit will share frontline insights on conservation, crimes, and challenges in the race to save South Africa's succulent. Welcome, Dr. Carina, the second one.
Hi, good day, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. So as it was mentioned, so I work for WWF, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, as well as for the South African National Biodiversity Institute, or SANBI, as it's commonly known. And my talk today is going to be really focusing on sort of some of the conservation work we're doing, the crimes and the challenges that we face in the race to save South Africa's succulents. So just a little bit of background to the succulent Karoo. Why is this, why is plant poaching such a big problem? What's the big deal? So the succulent Karoo stretches from southern Namibia into the northern province of South Africa. It is a recognized global biodiversity hotspot. It is the only arid biodiversity hotspot. And what it means is that it has a really high concentration of life, particularly plants and animals, especially given that it's such a dry area that receives very little rainfall. So there are over 6,500 species of plants alone that are in the succulent Karoo. And almost half of those are endemic, which means they don't occur anywhere else in the world. They only occur here in the succulent Karoo in South Africa. So we are home to the largest concentration of succulent plant species in the world, and more than 800 of those plants are listed as species of conservation concern, which means that they are at risk of becoming extinct. And there is a push now to get the succulent Karoo possibly declared a World Heritage Site, which really just goes to elevate its importance and its role in terms of conservation. So we've heard a bit about plant poaching, but a little bit of background to what's been kind of going on. So I should start by saying that plant poaching has always been around, but on a very, very small scale. So in the past, collectors themselves would come out and take, 2 or 3 plants, and there would be maybe a handful of cases a year, and it was very small numbers. But since the end of 2019, we've seen this dramatic increase in the demand for ornamental succulents. And this was just a combination of bad factors and timing. So the Northern Cape of South Africa went through a 7-year-long drought. So a lot of the local people lost their income, lost their livelihoods. They couldn't farm. They lost the livestock. So that, coupled with the start of 2020 lockdowns, which obviously impacted in terms of income generation and lack of tourism, just meant that it fueled this desperate poverty situation in the Northern Cape, which often leads to the development of crime. So now we've seen that high volumes of wild plants are being sourced and traded illegally. It's mostly succulents, but it's also moving into the bulb or geophyte space. So these are plants that have a large underground storage under the soil, but like an onion. And it really is being supplied mostly to Asia and also to East European markets, with a little bit to America. And as was mentioned by Dominique, this really is being fueled a lot by the online internet trading. So it's very easy, it's very unregulated space. You can post things on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, eBay, Yahoo, and things can be very easily sold. So all of these postings online are really just fueling this succulent mania, as we've called it. So it's just fueling this desire for people who want to have plants. And succulents are often very small. They're quite unique, can be quite interesting or funny looking. So it makes them very desirable for people to have them in a small plant pot on their windowsill. So they're very easy to look after and they don't take up a lot of space. So that's what's also contributing to this demand. So what we've now seen is the shift from a handful of collectors coming out to now thousands of plants being taken out. It's being run by coordinated syndicates that are involved in abalone and rhino poaching. And the trends keep changing. So we never know what plant they're going to go for next. I say it's a bit like fashion. It constantly keeps changing. Every few months, they're after something new. So this just gives a bit of an indication of the numbers of plants that have been poached since the end of 2019. And you can clearly see how there's been this drastic increase, since 2020. And for the last 3 years, we've had consistently over 300,000 plants that have been harvested. And this is only the plants that have been seized by law enforcement. This isn't the total number of plants that have left the country. We will never truly know what that number is, but we generally estimate that law enforcement intercepts about 20 to 25% of plants. So the true number of plants that have left South Africa is well into the millions. So to date, law enforcement has intercepted over 1.16 million plants that have been seized. And these get brought to SANBI as we're mandated to protect the biodiversity of the country. So this equates to us receiving between 3,000 to 6,000 plants per week. And to date, over 670 different species have been targeted. Of course, this level of impact of this level of poaching is really impacting populations as well as the ecosystem on a whole, because now instead of just taking a few out, thousands are being removed in one go, and this is driving species to extinction. So to date, we reckon between 7 to 12 species have gone extinct in the wild, which means they now only, there's too few of them left in the wild to actually function. And they basically only consist in conservation collections and botanical gardens. And one of the fastest cases has been that a species has gone functionally extinct from the end of December last year until this month, the population's being completely wiped from the wild. So it moves at an incredibly quick pace, and the species keep changing, which is a huge challenge for us to try and decide where we actually direct our resources. In the Conophytum genus, which is it's the most poached plant group, more than 85% of the genus is now considered critically endangered, which means they are one step away from being extinct in the wild. So as has been mentioned, there has been a national response and action plan that was drawn up in 2022. It was the fastest strategy to be endorsed by government. It has 7 objectives, as the other Karina mentioned. And SANBI leads on 6 out of 7 the objectives and 12 out of the 19 key actions. So we really are involved in the large majority of actually implementing this response plan together with our other partners and collaborators. So I'm going to talk through the response plan and what we're doing in each of the objectives. So I myself am largely involved in objectives 1, 2, 3, and 7. This is where majority of my work goes. So the first objective is, to try and ensure that we've got long-term survival of these populations. Now, the biggest challenge with this is it's vast remote areas. There's little cell phone reception. There's little infrastructure. So trying to actually keep these plants in the ground is a very difficult part in terms of policing and law enforcement and nature conservation. So as SANBI, what we do is we have identified the most critically rare species that occur in hotspot areas. So we've identified 70 species that occur within these hotspots. This is where the poaching is the most rife. And we monitor the populations and we collect seed and plant material so that we can at least bank and store those plants for future use. One of our big challenges to this, though, is getting access to land. Most of the land is private property, and because of the poaching, the landowners have really become so scared and distrustful of anyone that it's very difficult for us to get access onto the properties. So the plants that we've been collecting, seed and plant material, we're propagating them and splitting them across various gardens with also an aim to create a global meta collection so that we genetically bank these plants across the world in various gardens for safekeeping. Very much how people back up their information to various sources to keep it safe. If we go out and monitor, we also record if we find any evidence of poaching. So we often come across signs of poaching, such as food cans and wrappers, fireplaces, tools that are left behind. We've been having meetings with landowners to try and build that relationship and build that trust so that we can get access to properties. And a lot of this work has been done in partnership with the Millennium Seed Bank, Kew Gardens, and the custodians of rare and endangered wildflowers. The second objective, which is the area that I'm mostly involved in, is trying to actually manage the collections of plants that are coming in and try and keep a well-managed ex situ collection of plants. So ex situ means out of their natural setting. This is one of the most challenging areas for us as SANBI at the moment because of the large volumes of plants that are coming in. And these plants are all evidence in ongoing court cases. So there's a lot of legal and ethical challenges that we need to navigate. I often say that SANBI is basically like an orphanage. The plants don't belong to us. They're not our property. We are just the orphanage looking after wards of the state. And having to decide what their fate is. Of course, with this mass amount of plants coming in per week, we are really struggling in terms of lack of capacity and resources. We just don't have enough personnel, infrastructure, pots, soil. These are living plants and they continuously need care and resources. So we've had to resort to creating a triage system. So when plants come in and we identify them, we then see how they're listed on the IUCN Red List, and we focus on saving the critically endangered and the endangered species. Unfortunately, at this stage, anything below that is probably just going to die because we just can't cope with the magnitude coming in. It's, of course, extremely expensive to maintain such high numbers of plants and all the resources they need. And there's a very real risk of disease coming from the plants that are being collected in the wild. The plants are being housed in very confined areas, and that could potentially impact our other living collections as well. So we have to keep a very close eye on that. So a lot of this work has been done in partnerships with the IUCN, Botanical Gardens Conservation International, the Botanical Society of South Africa, the Cactus and Succulent Societies, as well as volunteer groups who are helping us in planting and just helping us in getting resources. So this is just an indication of kind of the conditions that we have. We unfortunately have just garages of boxes of plants really just desiccating and dying because we just don't have the resources to deal with it. So the third objective that we're involved in is working very closely with law enforcement to help capacitate them and enable them to do their work better. So we've had fantastic collaboration between law enforcement, the National Prosecuting Authority, which has really helped to improve communication. We've been able to get, across our challenges that we have, and the National Prosecuting Authority has really been able to help us try and navigate some of the legal challenges that we have in terms of holding on to the plants until cases are concluded, which can sometimes take years through the judiciary system. So that's really been a benefit. And they've also helped to expedite that handover process. And we are looking at ways in which we can get access to the fine money so that can come to us to help us in terms of housing the plants. So we've also, together with traffic, been doing training of police and traffic officers and customs officials, making them aware of plants and what the problem is and how severe the issue is, helping them to giving them plant identification training skills so that they can be better equipped and respond to the crisis. We've also been helping train prosecutors to get better sentencing, which we've really started to see come through now. We're also collaborating with our neighboring countries, particularly Namibia, because we are seeing plants move between the countries, so we can improve our communications and actually respond to information and intel that we get. We support the police with plant identification and gathering information for the court cases. We are starting to engage with courier companies because a large portion of the plants are couriered out of the country. And together with the scientific authority, we've created a plant identification guide for police and customs so that they can see what does a wildly harvested plant look like versus a plant that's being grown in a nursery. And we've also been working with the Endangered Wildlife Trust Sniffer Dog program, where they launched a pilot project last year, which has been highly successful. We rolled out the sniffer dogs at a couple of roadblocks, and they actually did catch a poacher red-handed with plants in their vehicle. So collaboration between law enforcement and conservation is really crucial to benefit both parties. The fourth objective really deals mostly with the scientific authority of SANBI. So as has been mentioned, one of the big challenges we have is that we have a number of provinces in South Africa, and each of those provinces have their own environmental or their nature conservation ordinances, and these don't speak to each other. So we have problems where plants are listed as protected in one province, but they pitch up in another province, but it's not protected there. So law enforcement struggles to actually be able to enforce any kind of legal action because they're not actually protected in that province. So we're trying to create awareness around that, and the scientific authority is trying to harmonize the legislation on a national level and provincially. 17, so the Conophytum genus and 17 other threatened succulent species were listed on the CITES Appendix 3, February last year. That's been a big tool to help us able to legally enforce this. And we are looking at having to list other plants onto CITES as the poachers move to different species. They've also helped create education, and we can get this through the media. So they've created this conscientious consumer information guide, which is to really support consumers to be ethical and responsibly source their plants when they're buying them, what to look for. And this is in the process of being translated into a number of different languages and being distributed across the globe. The fifth objective is working with the communities. This has been a very challenging objective to really start getting going. It entails engaging with the local communities and looking at how we can diversify their livelihoods so that they can get other sources of income. also doing a lot of education with the communities so that they understand the impact of the poaching. We're seeing that a lot of the youth are being drawn into these syndicates and into crime. So it's through peer pressure, monitoring influences, getting hooked on drugs. So the poaching brings a lot of social problems into these communities that has to be made aware of. So it's looking at stimulating the economy in those areas where the trade in succulents is very high to try and get other sources of income going for those communities. So there was a workshop held with the communities to get their opinion on how they feel about the problem. But we are in the process of trying to get funding to actually get this objective really going. And our partners here are working with Conservation South Africa, Sociotech, Wilderness Foundation, and the SA Hunters Association, as well as with a number of other smaller NGOs that actually work in the Northern Cape with the communities. So the sixth objective is looking at around developing effective and consistent communications. One of our real big challenges in this space is that people don't emotionally connect to plants like they do to animals. So any animal-related crimes get a lot more media exposure than plants do. So we've really had to try and get this out and people to understand this. So we call this plant blindness. It's difficult to get people to relate to a number of plants dying versus seeing a dead rhino, for example. But the communication plan is also to make sure that any information that we're giving out is consistent, it's factual, and that it's up to date, because we don't want any media releases to cause unintended consequences by stimulating the market even further. And then the final objective also has been quite a challenging one to really get off the ground. And this is in terms of developing the formal economy. It is a tricky one because it has to be done in a way that doesn't stimulate the black market and illegal poaching even further. And there's a lot of legal things that need to be navigated around. So there was a workshop hosted earlier in the year, and one of the first steps we realized that really needs to happen is actually to get ornamental plants listed on the National Biodiversity Economy Strategy as a sector that can actually contribute towards generating income for South Africa. Because ideally what we want is for our South African growers and nurseries to be able to produce these plants and sell them, and that the money comes back to South Africa and benefits the communities and doesn't just go to some organized crime syndicate overseas somewhere. So we're looking at potentially hosting auctions or creating ways that we can sell off plants and propagate them to create a formal and legal trade to compete with the illegal trade. So thank you very much, and thank you to ENACT and ISS for hosting this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becker-Dutoit. I think that was a very illuminating presentation on what the government or what SANBI is doing to protect succulents in South Africa. Our fourth speaker will be Advocate Aradhana Eramun, who is a senior state advocate of the organized crime component of the National Prosecuting Authority, NPA. Advocate Aradhana has prosecuted many succulent-related offenses and will relay her first-hand experiences in prosecuting plant-related crimes. Welcome, Advocate.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for affording me the opportunity to address you. And I must at the outset commend my fellow panelists and take comfort in the knowledge that I stand shoulder to shoulder with like-minded individuals who are equally passionate about the fight against environmental crime. The first thing I want to say is South Africa is the most biologically diverse country in the world. Endemism rate for plants is 65%, and South Africa is ranked 6th out of the world's 17 mega-diverse countries. Unfortunately, this has its drawback. This makes South Africa a magnet for poachers. International markets are the main drivers of environmental crime. It would appear that the more endangered the species, the higher demand and accordingly the higher price. Now, according to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, illegal trade in fauna and flora is one of the four largest illegal activities in the world. And wildlife crime is considered a low-risk, high-benefit crime. The illegal trade in specifically flora is estimated to be in the multi-million-dollar industry. Investigation and research has shown that the demand for succulents is not based in the medicinal value, but rather as a trophy acquisition. And my fellow panelists have said exactly that. It would appear that these plants are being sought solely for the basis of their beauty, their uniqueness, and to be displayed as trophies.
Excuse me, Advocate, could you put it in a presentation mode so that the audience can be able to see?
I'm sorry, did I? Are we
there's
there?
There's a button on your, I think. Yeah, it's better. It's better now.
Sorry, have you seen the previous slides?
It was very tiny, but you can continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have the one matter that I definitely want to bring to the webinar's attention is my colleagues and counterparts in the Northern Cape have had a huge success and breakthrough. In the most simplest terms, if I can explain it, the legislation, the Northern Cape Nature Conservation Act, has a schedule of species of plants that are covered. And they encountered a major challenge when one of the regional magistrates had acquitted an accused on the basis that the item or the species of that particular plant was not specifically listed in the schedule of the Act, which caused the Director of Public Prosecutions in the Northern Cape to take that magistrate on appeal, and accordingly, 2 matters were taken to the High Court. And fortunately for us, the appeal succeeded on both. And what is noteworthy from that judgment is the court's recognition that the courts have a duty, that the Northern Cape has the responsibility to protect its fauna and flora, particularly in the Namakwa land. Those matters were then remitted back to the regional magistrate, and I have on screen the outcome of those matters. In the Beerkus matter, the decision of the regional magistrate to acquit both accused in terms of Section 174 was set aside, and the magistrate was directed to reopen proceedings. Both the accused were sentenced to a direct term of imprisonment of 8 years, of which 2 years was suspended. In the second matter that went on appeal, the judgment of the regional magistrate was set aside and replaced with a guilty verdict. The matter was remitted to the regional magistrate for sentencing, and the accused was sentenced to 8 years direct imprisonment. In another matter also emanating from the Northern Cape, in the Kuruman Regional Court, an accused was sentenced to 10 years direct imprisonment. I must say that I take my hat off to my colleagues in the Northern Cape. Those sentences were outstanding, and we are using it in the Western Cape as a point of reference. In the Western Cape, as Carina has said, we really didn't see a spike in these cases. As far as I can recall, the very first matter that I dealt with was in 2015, and the next case steadily, there was a steady increase, but in 2019, 2020 is when we saw a huge spike in cases. In 2024 or 2023, 2024, we're seeing a gradual increase, but it appears to be stabilizing. The matter that is on your screen right now was a case that the Western Cape dealt with. It was a 2019 matter where 2 Korean nationals were arrested. And they were sentenced in January 2020 they received 6 years direct imprisonment, which was suspended for 5 years, and they each paid a 2.5 million rand fine. They were declared undesirable persons to re-enter the Republic, and they were extradited to the US for a similar offense for the illegal picking of flora in California. What was interesting about this particular matter is that Mr. Kim had been charged in the US. He was released on bail. He had absconded bail. He escaped through Mexico, and in October of 2019 was found in South Africa. Now, what is noteworthy about this particular case is that this accused was on bail in the US for a similar offense, and here he finds himself in South Africa in 2019 with the largest seizure of plants. To date, this particular matter was our largest seizure. The matter was finalized in January 2020 when Mr. Kim was extradited, and he remained in custody since his arrest until his extradition. When he went to meet his fate in the US, he remained in custody, and they finalized that matter in January of 2022, and Mr. Kim was sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 2 years. I highlighted this particular case because it showed excellent collaboration between two countries, that being the United States and South Africa. The one noteworthy, there's just two things I want to inform this seminar on, is the fact that there's been excellent collaboration, not only from my local counterparts, but also fellow countries. In July of last year, we hosted a Namibian delegation who, for the very first time, saw plant poaching in Namibia, and we were happy to assist them and collaborate with them so that they can also, and this working relationship that we've created, not only with countries, bodes well for all of us that are in this fight together. As far as a South African collaboration goes, we have a national program, and I belong to the GEF7 working group. We meet biannually, and this comprises of members from DFFE as well as the NPA, and this is a meeting of prosecutors from all 9 provinces where we meet to address the challenges each of us experience in our different provinces and help one another. As far as a provincial level is concerned, I am very fortunate that I have the support of Cape Nature, SANBI, SAPS, the STESU unit, who work very closely with us in this fight against environmental crime, and specifically succulent poaching. Thank you very much. I tried to speed because I was very concerned about time. And it seems all my panelists have left me with the least amount, so I hope I've achieved whatever, but I will be happy to field questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Advocate, for sharing your experiences, your prosecution experiences on illicit plant trade across Southern Africa. We really, really appreciate. I think now we go to the open question and answer session. And most of the questions have actually been answered on the chat box. But I would want to start by the question raised by Manuel Standup. Manuel Standup is asking, do you have information about the value chain? How promising is it for local communities to participate in the activities? And how is the value distributed on the different levels of the network? So this is an open question. Perhaps we start with Dr. Carina Bruwer, and then we go through the rest of the presenters. Thank you.
Thanks, Willis. So I've tried to answer Manuel in the chat. So first by noting that my report focused specifically on the implementation of the strategy. So I didn't specifically do a value analysis across the entire supply chain, but there is ongoing research by other entities, and perhaps they have this information. And I know that there are also hopefully pending prosecutions of middlemen, for example, or more senior network members. And so once that information has been gathered, hopefully there will be more information to put together a value analysis. In terms of how promising it is for local communities to participate in illegal harvesting. Again, I think it depends on whether they're, harvesting, whether they are a transporter, or whether they are perhaps working, in a packing facility where they pack the plants. So all of them would receive different benefits, but we do know that they receive a fraction of what the plants are being sold for abroad. So yeah, I hope that answers your question more or less. And if there any of the other panelists want to answer to that, perhaps they have more information.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So with a traditional syndicate supply chain, we look at like a pyramid. You've got a lot of people at the bottom, and as it becomes more sophisticated or organized towards the top, you've got your organizers and financiers. What we see with your illegal harvesters is that they really do get paid exactly what Carina said, a fraction of the value of the plants. That if those plants have to be sold overseas in the demand or destination countries, they would possibly fetch quite a bit of money, and so unfortunately there are a lot of people who are willing to get involved in this work for whatever amount of money, because it's a lot of the time it's better than having nothing. And so often the illegal harvesters are paid in cash. There is some suggestions that they might be paid in drugs, which is quite similar to the abalone trade. But for now, where we're struggling or trying to find information is who are the guys in the middle and what's happening overseas, and how are they earning the money that they earn, and who do they sell to? Do they sell directly to a consumer, or are there multiple steps in the chain later on in the destination country? And depending on those steps, the values will change with each group that's involved. So for now, we're doing quite a bit of research into this. It would be great to be able to get more information on this. We've done offender interviews before in the past, and that's been really interesting, because that's come out with a lot of people saying, oh, there's a standard price per elephant tusk, or there's, oh, I get paid per kilogram of this wildlife product. But for now, with succulents, unfortunately, that information is missing. But yeah, something that we are trying to understand and figure out and share with law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Any other response from the panel?
Yeah, if I can come in.
Yes.
Yeah, Dominique's captured it quite well. The value chain really is a pyramid. So the first level is the collectors, which are the locals. They get paid very little, and that varies. We had a situation recently where they told us they got paid 250 Rand a day to collect plants. And they spend multiple days out in the veld, camp there and collect the plants. So it isn't a lot of money to us, but for them who are trying to put food on the table, it is quite a lot of money. Then from the collectors, it then goes to people who will then transport the plants. We see them often trying to get the plants from the Northern Cape to Cape Town. There will often be an exporter who will sit in Cape Town and sort of have like a house week, coordinates everything from there. And then from the exporter then goes to sort of a middleman, and then exporter, and then it jumps out of the border, and then there's a whole network on the other side. But the locals really get paid very, very little in comparison to what the plant is actually worth. The other thing is a bit like what Dominique mentioned, is that the prices of the plants is not consistent. So we see that it fluctuates. And there has been a little bit of tracking work done to see how the price of the plants changes. So obviously, as it's very in demand, like is the normal case with anything you buy, the price shoots up, but when it's not in demand, then the price goes down again. So the price of each individual plant fluctuates, or each species fluctuates as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becker Dutoit. The next question is really directed to Advocate Aredana. And the question is from Colin Wondo, and she's asking on the most succulent cases that have been withdrawn lately in Northern Cape and Western Cape. Are there measures in place to prosecute those cases, probably in terms of financial investigations and supply chains?
Yes, thank you, Willis. What I'm not clear on is what specific cases is the question directed at, because those matters that were withdrawn because of the challenge from the Northern Cape have all been placed back on the roll. And those matters that have other issues. We're not talking about this specific challenge that we saw from the Northern Cape. Those matters are under investigation, and all matters will be placed back on the roll on finalization of investigations. So I'm not entirely clear. Perhaps you can explain exactly which matters you're referring to, or you're welcome to email me directly and I will have to follow up.
Colin, would you like to explain to the advocate?
Hi. So
Hi.
yeah, probably these are the cases that have been struck off the roll. So I was just intending to know if those cases are still ongoing, or if we do have any update on those cases. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, but I can obviously follow up on it.
Thank you so much.
Like I said, if you want specifically for me to follow up, I will be happy to do so. Let me have a list of the matters you're referring to, and I will follow up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So our next question is from Ms. Bola Adetula. Ms. Bola Adetula is asking whether some of the species of the succulents are edible, or whether they are also used in pharmaceutical industries. I would start again with Dr. Carina Bruwer and have other panelists respond.
Thanks, Willis. So as far as we are aware, the ones that we are discussing today, they are all in demand for their ornamental or aesthetic properties. But of course, there are other species that are in demand for medicinal purposes, or perhaps even as food. But this is not the nature of the market that we have discussed today. So as far as we are aware, overwhelmingly, they are in demand for effectively their beauty and their interesting shapes.
Thank you, Carina. And Dr. Becca Dutoit?
No, I absolutely agree with what Karina said there. As far as we are aware, it is majority for the ornamental trade. There are a few of the bulbs and things that are used for medicinal uses, but that's mostly traditional use here in South Africa. We don't really know of medicinal use overseas with those plants.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to notify all the audiences that we are going to run a quick poll, and the questions that are being asked are anonymous. This is basically just for our monitoring and evaluation. So you'll see a poll popping up into your screen, and then you just respond to it. It just takes maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Willis, you're muted.
Yes, Carina?
Oh,
I
sorry,
see there's a hand up from Bola.
Oh, yes. Would you respond to Dr. Bola's question, starting from Carina?
I was unable to hear you just now. Can you please repeat that?
Dr. Bola had asked whether the succulents are edible, and I think there was a response going around on that.
Thanks. So if any of the other panelists want to reply to that, you're more than welcome.
Can I talk? I have another.
Yes, Bola, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm joining you guys from the East Coast of America. I've been up since 3 a.m. because of the interest I have. Now, you have confirmed that it's not edible, it's not used in a pharmaceutical industry so far, but let me sound a note of caution from my own experience. I haven't seen any evidence that is used for anything else. Just keep your options open. You might be surprised to find that there are some other uses, especially in the Asian countries. So let us continue to watch and see and monitor what is going on, because why the sudden interest it cannot only just be ornamental. I have my suspicion because I am an expert on drug control and crime prevention. So let's keep our options open and then we watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bola. I think because this research is based on the data that has just been presented, I would not want to put the presenters on so much focus based on whether it's a succulent or not. But if any of them, whether it's edible or not, and if any of them wants to respond specifically to that addition from Bola, then you're welcome.
Willis, maybe just one point from me. So we take note of that, and of course we're always keeping our eyes and our ears open to really understand as much as we can about the illegal market. But I think for a lot of our purposes, most importantly is these plants are being harvested, transported, sold, bought, contrary to national legislation and some of them international legislation. So at the end of the day, the drivers of the market, of course, are important, but regardless of the uses, these plants are illegally being harvested and traded. And so that is just, I think, something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Carina. I think the last question would be coming from, it's a question that you already addressed, Carina, in the chat box, but at what point exactly does succulents become part of the normal commodity? I would want you probably just to expound on that, because this seems to be the question that is repeated many times.
Right, and any of the other panelists are also welcome to share their experiences. So as I've answered in the chat box, there are multiple ways that this can be done so that the plants can be disguised. So we can see that criminal networks would either completely circumvent legislation, trying to hide their activities entirely, or they might even exploit legal trade. So for example, they might hide illegally harvested plants among legally harvested ones, and perhaps the consumers can't tell the difference. It might be that the illegally harvested plants are used as mother plants, so they are used to produce more plants, and then again it becomes difficult to distinguish the difference, to establish the difference between an illegally harvested and an artificially grown plant. We see that they are making fraudulent permits, they are getting fraudulent phytosanitary certificates. So there really are multiple ways, and I know I'm biased, but do read the report. There are different ways in there that says how they try and launder or hide the illegal nature of their activities.
I think I can add. Yeah, so the one thing to keep in mind is that there are already existing smuggling routes out of South Africa with the rhino horn and with the abalone and a lot of other wildlife, even snakes, reptiles, insects. So those routes are sort of really established with the syndicates, and they're just using it. So a lot of the syndicates, you could almost say, are just diversifying their business interests by expanding out and including plants in their now portfolio of their business. But we are seeing a lot of plants that are being sent through courier companies. So they wrap them up like with tissue paper and in boxes. We've even seen sometimes plants have been smuggled out in like toy games. So they take all the toys out, put the plants in there, rewrap it, reseal it with plastic, and send it out. Even through postage, they try to send the plants out. So there are a number of ways in which they are currently getting it out. And having some of the exporters based here in South Africa, also helps them to do that. They'll import one thing and export the plant stuff through another means. And then we're also seeing the plants move across our borders. Like we mentioned, we're starting to pick up things happening more in Mozambique, things moving through Namibia. So if they realize we're starting to get quite active at the airports, they might try to start moving the stuff out through land-based borders as well. So these guys are very organized and really have their roots established to get the plants out. The plants are also incredibly small, so it's very easy to hide them into other things. Sometimes they've even been tucked in under like dried fruit, into packets of dried fruit or something, so that if someone opens it, they just see packets of fruit. So with these plants being often quite small, especially the conophytums, it's quite easy to tuck them into little nooks and crannies. But I think traffic probably also has a good idea of how they're getting stuff out.
So if I would just like to ask from the audience, thank you so much, Dr. Becker-Dutoit. If there's any other pending question that we could explore in the next 1 minute or so that we finish in the next 2 minutes, So I'm asking from the audience if there's any other pending question, because most of the questions were already addressed within the chat box. And so we are just trying to illuminate a few of them. Any question? If not, I take this opportunity to really thank the panel, to thank all of you presenters, from Dr. Carina Bruwer, Dr. Becca Dutoit, Advocate Arudana, and Madam Prince Lou, for contributing to today's debate on succulents, illicit succulents trade in South Africa. We really appreciate your time, and we at ENACT probably look forward to partnering with you in the future in the work that you do in South Africa. Secondly, we thank the European Union, because they are the funders of the ENACT program, and without their support, then we would not be able to do this level of research. And the third thing from me is that ENACT program has a lot of research publications that are already on the website, dating from 2017, on various forms of transnational organized crimes. I would encourage all our audience, all our participants in this meeting, to explore the website, www.enactafrica.org, and see what ENACT has been doing in terms of research on transnational organized crimes in Africa, in all parts of the region. So that is something that I would encourage all of us to do. Otherwise, thank you so much for